Greetings, mighty Warsong Templars. This presentation is to introduce a new great building club called the GBQ, the Great Building Q Club. Some terminology first, as I will be using FOE Street Talk. FP is Forge Point, GB is Great Building. A GB level is one level of a great building. Leveling is completing one level of a great building. A GB club is a group of players seeking to get their great buildings leveled by leveraging a mutual exchange of Forge Points, although sometimes not all members bid equal amounts of Forge Points. Bidding is spending Forge Points on someone else's great building. Others might refer to this as contributing Forge Points or giving Forge Points. But since there is often competition and uncertainty of the outcome similar to an auction, I refer to this as bidding. An outside bid is a bid from a player that is not in your great building club. This player may be a fellow guildmate, friend, or neighbor. And receipts are either Forge Points that have been bid on your great building, or rewards you collected from bidding on someone else's great building. I'm using receipts as a generic term for what you receive. The whole reason we have GB clubs is because we are often not satisfied with native bidding, which is when all of our great building bids come from other players independent of any action you may take, specifically independent of you spending your Forge Points to help get your GBs leveled. In the 2+ years that I have been playing, I have seen a number of different GB clubs. Since I want to introduce a new GB club, I thought it would be best to review some of these other clubs that have stood the test of time, and then compare this new club to those existing ones. The best scenario any of us can have for our GBs is when they get leveled without us having to do anything, and it's also great when they get leveled in a reasonable amount of time. Of course, this is seldom the case. For instance, one of my GBs has not been leveled or even bid on for over a year. Poor Frauenkirsche. But when we decide something must be done to assist our GBs in leveling, the easiest, most accessible method of leveling GBs is to bid our own Forge Points in our GBs. When other players see that you are leveling your own GB, some will see a bargain and decide to bid on your great building. But this is seldom the case until you have bid a substantial number of Forge Points. Self-leveling is probably most productive when your great building has a high chance of being noticed by someone looking for blueprints of that great building. But when many of our guildmates, friends, and neighbors are doing exactly the same thing, it can be hard to find an eager bidder. The Fixed Rotation Great Building Club is the first one that I remember when I started playing the game. Often I have seen this type of club set up with 5 to 7 players who bid on a designated great building from each member of the club, doing a weekly rotation among those members. I've also seen this with concurrent 14-member clubs doing a full rotation every 2 weeks. Basically, everyone is bidding the same amount. This club is effective when outside bidders get into the mix. The club member bids are cumulatively substantial but are evenly spread over multiple players, so no member's bid is very high. This is what attracts outside bidders and what keeps them bidding. Unfortunately, if outside bidders do not come to bid on your great building, there is nothing very special about this club. I generally see 2-player swaps between players with lots of Forge Points to burn. The real advantage here is that you, as the bidder, collect reward Forge Point packages while getting your great buildings leveled. Because of the way Inno has designed great building levels and rewards, a first place reward includes about 10% of the Forge Points needed for leveling. And since a few other scavenger bidders are likely to bid on the 2nd through 5th place reward spots, members often do not need to level great buildings completely on their own, which serves to increase the ratio of how many reward Forge Point packages you receive to how many Forge Points you bid, bringing this ratio to greater than 10%. The Endless Swap is probably the newest great building club invention of the FOE community. Anyone in the guild may bid except the last bidder. When playing, you bid a designated amount of Forge Points, usually 5, to the last bidder's designated great building. You post your bid and state which of your great buildings you want bid on next. The great things about this club are that anyone and everyone in the guild can participate at any time, and that you can bid as many times as you want, provided you wait at least one turn. However, from what I can discern, there is no guarantee that your bids will result in any rewards, thinking of those valuable reward Forge Point packages. And if that's the case, you are better off bidding on your own great buildings. I think the real advantage of this club is to fake competition on your great buildings to get real bidders to bid more. Of course, there isn't any guarantee that they will respond in that manner. Sticks to Bricks is a call for help from your fellow guild members to help you get your new great building to level 1, getting it operational quickly. It is an implied Forge Point swap, and by calling for help, you are agreeing to answer another guildmate's call for help when they get sticks. Sticks to Bricks is awesome when every guild member is involved, but I've never seen full involvement. Usually it's just maybe 10 or so guildmates who are committed to responding. I have been part of only one guild that required every member to bid at least one Forge Point to sticks and dismissed members who did not bid but then made the call when they got sticks. I love seeing those players get booted, but it created a sense of big brother and was probably a net negative for the guild. Okay, with those great building clubs reviewed, now I'd like to introduce this new club idea, the Great Building Q, or simply GBQ. This club requires at least several players, probably a minimum of 4, but it is easily scalable and can accommodate up to the entire guild. The club is based on the idea of a Great Building Queue, which is simply a list of member great buildings to be leveled. And here's an example queue. Members bid on the great building in the front of the queue. In this example, Don M is at the front of the queue, so members bid on his designated GB level. In this case, it's his deal castle level 3. Once his deal castle has leveled, members bid on the next player in the queue. More exactly, after Don's deal castle levels, the queue is updated. Don designates a new GB level, which will likely show up towards the end of the queue, and probably the number 2 player moves to the front of the queue. The way the queue works is that the order reflects each member's net. Your net is how many forge points you have bid minus the number of forge points your great buildings have received. Every time a great building levels, we record each member's bid and the number of forge points the owner of the great building received. These numbers are added to a running total, and then a new queue results, which orders members based on each member's net. Basically, the member at the front of the queue has bid the most forge points and has received the least forge points on his great buildings. That's why he's at the front. It's time for him to collect. We also keep track of the reward forge point packages members receive after a great building levels. These count against your net since you receive these forge points. The real benefit is no penalty for finishing in any place once the great building levels, meaning that it does not matter if another member gets reward forge point packages because those rewards are counted. It removes competition among players for rewards and allows members to focus on only one thing: how many forge points can they pump into the club so that their great building moves to the front of the queue fastest. One additional thing to mention from our beta testing of this club is that we also accounted for reward blueprints and medals to further remove competition among players. This is especially important now that we can level great buildings past level 10, and with some great buildings being more popular than others, like Alcatraz and Castel del Monte. We are counting blueprints as 1 forge point each, and medals as 1 forge point per every 300 medals. Of course, why bid on the Tower of Babel in the queue when the Innovation Tower right after it will yield infinitely more medals? This is not a perfect system, since everyone places a different value on certain blueprints and medals, but it's a starting point. Okay, let's do some math. I've set up an Excel spreadsheet to do this for me, but by showing you the calculations, I think you can get a better appreciation for what's going on. In this example of Credolfo's Tower of Babel, which was just leveled by the GBQ, each member's net is listed in the table as well as Credolfo's receipts. Sean bid 59 forge points, Enclave bid 50, and so on. Since these forge points were bid on Credolfo's Babel, Credolfo is listed as having received 150 forge points, hence the negative. Next, each member's bid is modified by the rewarded forge point packages. This example is simplified because we're not going to discuss blueprints and medals, but the idea is the same. Sean received a 15 forge point reward package, so his net comes out to 44 forge points, 59 minus 15. Enclave received a 10 forge point reward package, so his net is 40, and so on. Credolfo's net is not the 150 forge points required to level his Babel, because while members bid 150 forge points, 30 forge points were returned to them when the Babel was leveled, so his net is actually negative 120. Once everyone's net is calculated, the queue is ordered from highest to lowest. In this case, Sean is first, Enclave is second, and so on with Credolfo last. However, the previous example is missing one last calculation. It's not your net that determines the queue order, it's your cumulative net. The cumulative net is simply a running total of your nets for each great building that has been leveled in the queue. With that in mind, let's examine the bidding on the next great building that was in the queue, which was Sean's level 2 deal castle. Everyone's bid is recorded, with the exception of self-bidding, Sean's 5 forge points, which just cancels out, so we leave it out altogether. Reward forge point packages are accounted for, and the net is calculated. Then everyone's net is added to their running total, which is net plus previous net equals cumulative net. This cumulative net will become the previous net for the next great building. Now using everyone's cumulative net, the queue is ordered once again. Now Enclave is first, Don is second, and so on with Sean last. Generally, whoever's great building just leveled will move to the end of the queue. This might not be the case if the great building was at a low level and the previous great building was at a high level. Remember that had a high level great building leveled will likely be towards the bottom of the queue for a while. To better understand how each player's cumulative net changes across multiple great building levelings and as the queue progresses, let's examine this graph. Each color is for a different player. The horizontal axis represents each great building in the queue in the order in which they were leveled, and the vertical axis is each player's cumulative net. The center line represents a net of 0, which is where everyone starts at the beginning of the club or whenever they join the club. From one great building to the next, each player's net will do one of three things: go down, go up, or remain the same. For the player whose great building is at the front of the queue, the cumulative net will go down after the great building was leveled, as they only received forge points. For example, we know that the first great building in the queue was Don's because its cumulative net went down after it was leveled. The second great building was Stern's because his cumulative net subsequently went down. Then it was Superheroes, then Sean's, then Credolfo's, then Enclave's, then Sean's again, and so on. A player's cumulative net rises when they bid on the great building that was leveled. So for the first great building, it looks like Credolfo might have been the only player who bid, because we don't see any other member's cumulative net increase much. For the second great building, it looks like Credolfo, Sean, Enclave, Don, and possibly Superhero bid. For the third great building, it looks like Enclave and Stearns might have been the only members bidding. Lastly, when a player does not bid on the leveled great building, their net does not change. On the graph, this is represented by a horizontal line. So wherever we see a horizontal line between two great buildings, that member bid very little or nothing at all. Something else to note is the difference between players bidding lots of forge points and those bidding very few. For example, it looks like Stearns, the orange line, is bidding a small number of forge points to each great building, but he is consistently bidding and his cumulative net is slowly rising. After his great building was leveled at 2, he had to wait 14 great buildings until his great building was at the front of the queue to be leveled again. On the other hand, Crodolfo is likely bidding everything he has as his cumulative net moves up quickly from great building to great building. Several other things to mention from our beta testing. Great buildings get leveled quickly, some within minutes of the previous one leveling. I think the longest time to leveling has been just under 2 days. Although to be fair, we restricted beta testing to great buildings at level 5 or below, so we have not faced a level 10 Alcatraz to see how long that takes, or how long it takes the owner to rise to the front of the queue afterwards, as that would cause a big reduction in the owner's cumulative net. The club seems to be good for finishing off a great building that already has some substantial outside bidding, especially if the club members can score some reward forge point packages. And there seems to be neither a definite advantage nor disadvantage for bidding on your own great building as long as other club members claim all the reward forge point packages. But because great buildings level so quickly, this club is in no way suited for attracting outside bids, just for closing the deal after you have substantial outside bidding. House rules. These rules are not necessary for the GBQ but may enhance its value. First is the option to bid on any great building in the queue, not being restricted to the great building in the front of the queue. We've had several instances of players bidding on the second great building in the queue without affecting the overall flow of the queue, as all of the other members have been satisfied to bid on the great building in the front of the queue. This allowance can be especially helpful for members looking for specific blueprints. We did not implement an option for great buildings and sticks, but this rule would allow for sticks to move to the front of the queue immediately and displace whatever great building was there. We have had a couple of changes to designated great buildings in the queue in which the owner changed his mind about what he wanted leveled next. This should not be a problem as long as the great building that is being swapped out has not yet been bid on by club members. It would add additional counting time to examine each great building before it enters the queue and subtract out any member bids from prior arrangements. The reason to consider this is to prevent double counting of forge points. We all have stray bids on others' great buildings, many of those bids being the result of some sort of forge point swap, frequently from the endless swap. If those GB levels are then included in the GBQ, the bidding player would get credit for their forge points a second time, and the receiving player would essentially have to repay those forge points a second time. This is something that could unfairly penalize or help players and should be decided on when the club is implemented. To summarize, let us compare and contrast different great building clubs to get a better feel of when and how the GBQ could be a benefit. Considering the different clubs in terms of different criteria, it seems like the GBQ would be of least benefit to those players who are getting substantial outside bidding already. It also requires a manager to reorder the queue after each great building is level, and probably a backup manager to make sure the numbers are input correctly and that someone's always checking on things regularly. The benefits include being scalable, as any number of new members can join at any time and can start bidding immediately. This is the only club that accounts for rewards, so that there is no penalty for not placing in a reward spot. Not that other clubs cannot account for rewards, it's just that I've never seen it done before. And the club also allows for flexible bidding. In terms of bidding as much or as little as you want, the club is not unique, but just as good as some other clubs. But in terms of being selective on which great buildings in the queue you want to bid, it is probably better than any other club. So these are the pros and cons. Every player has their own style of play, and in your progression of the game, there are certain points when the GBQ could be a benefit. If you've completed the tech tree, have very few outside bids, and are trying to get your great buildings leveled as quickly as possible, then this is the club for you, and that was my motivation for the design. Now that we've beta tested the club and had players at different points in the progression of the game try it out, it does not seem to be that useful if you are prioritizing the tech tree. However, for players who spend some forge points searching for blueprints or on their own great buildings, then this club may be helpful, as it allows for targeted bidding, you will get all of your bid forge points returned to your great buildings, and has a better return on your forge points than self-bidding. Thank you for listening to my sales pitch, and with that, forge on!